I think are important, but I'd like to talk about some of the key ones. Bahar is a young woman who actually wrote an email to Mina Ahadi. Mina Ahadi's just started a council of ex-Muslims in Germany. And Bahar wrote that you will see me walking in the street wearing a veil, but I am not a Muslim. I am forced to wear the veil by my fathers and by my brothers. And if I don't, I fear they will kill me. Before I felt alone, but now I know I am not. And she wanted Mina to know that it was because of Mina and her campaign that she felt she was not. Of course, Bahar is not alone. There are innumerable women and girls in Asia, in the Middle East, in North Africa, and even here in the heart of Europe, who know from personal experience what it means to be female under Islam, hidden from view, bound, gagged, mutilated, murdered, without rights, and threatened and intimidated day in and day out for transgressing Islamic mores. The veil, in my opinion, more than anything else, symbolizes this bleak reality. In my opinion, therefore, it is impossible to address the status of women under Islamic laws and defend women's rights without addressing and denouncing the veil. And this is why the veil is the first thing that Islamists impose when they come to power, or when they have access to power. And this is also why improper veiling, removing the veil, burning it, transgressing it, is often seen as a symbol of resistance, whether in countries where it's compulsory or in countries where it's not. You see women leaving the home, getting away from it, and then removing their veils. I know our opponents often argue that there are many more pressing issues with regards to women's status. What's all the fuss, they ask? To me, it's like asking, what's all the fuss about racial apartheid or the segregation of races in apartheid South Africa? After all, there were so many pressing issues faced by blacks in that country. I suppose that is why the South African government then kept asserting that separate is equal. And separate does not mean being unequal, which incidentally is something the Islamists do all the time. But we know otherwise. And we know, at least in hindsight, why the physical act of segregation was crucial and symbolic of what it meant to be black in South Africa. Similarly, the veil is a symbol of sexual apartheid and the segregation of the sexes. In countries where Islam rules, like in Iran, separate entrances for women in certain government offices, separate areas for women seating on buses, the banning of women from certain public spaces and arenas like sports stadiums, a curtain dividing the Caspian Sea for segregated swimming and so on, is what it means in practice to be a female under Islam. That people transgress these rules daily is a testimony to their humanity and not the laws or the state that imposes them by force. When we talk about the situation in Iran, some of these apologists will concede, okay, compulsory veiling has to be imposed, though I have yet to hear them oppose it other than in their arguments to defend the veil. But if it is chosen freely, then one must defend the right to wear the veil. I wholeheartedly disagree. Adult women may have the right, in quotes, to veil, though that right is in no way absolute, as many rights aren't, and it's a completely different matter for children, which I'll come to later. But having the right to do something is very different from defending the freely chosen veil or the so-called right to veil. There may be women who freely choose to genitally mutilate their daughters or immolate themselves on their husband's funeral pyres, but that does not mean that we must then defend the right of women to do so, or defend the practice of female genital mutilation and sati. The defense of rights is not about making everyone agree with you, as you will always find people who will defend and commit the indefensible. And that is what religion usually does, in my opinion. It's about protecting human beings, sometimes even from themselves. The usage of the term choice in this context is extremely deceptive. First off, in many places like Iran, it's the law of the land. You are fined, arrested, beaten, imprisoned, and even killed for transgressing the veil and Islamic mores. In others, where it's not the law, it's effectively so because of pressure and intimidation from parasitical, self-appointed imams and community leaders and Islamic leaders and family members. One example of this in Britain is a joint statement about the veil by so-called Muslim groups, scholars, and leaders. And what they've said in it is that the veil, quote, is not open to debate. The statement goes so far as to advise all Muslims to exercise extreme caution in this issue, since denying any part of Islam may lead to disbelief. And execution is the penalty for people who become disbelievers when Islam is in power. They've urged them to keep this debate within the realm of scholarly discussion amongst the people of knowledge and authority in the Muslim community. A recent Channel 4 dispatches program recorded a mullah in Green Lane Mosque in Birmingham saying, "Allah has created women deficient." And a satellite broadcast from the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia, a very fancy name, beamed into the mosque, suggesting that children should be hit if they don't pray and if they don't wear the hijab. And you've all heard about the Australian cleric. He's the most senior Islamic cleric in Australia, who's compared unveiled women to uncovered meat, implying that they have invited rape and sexual assault. And he says, quote, "If you take that uncovered meat and you place it outside without a cover, and the cats come to eat it, whose fault is it? The cats or the uncovered meat?" And clearly the answer is the uncovered meat. If she was in her room, if she was in her home, if she was in her hijab, no problems would have occurred. End of quote. While misogynist sermons are the norms in mosques across the world, and all religions, these are a few examples of how a climate of intimidation and fear may make women so-called choose to veil, even in places where veiling is not compulsory. Remove these. And I would even go so far as to say that there will be very few women who will choose a mobile prison, other than those who today, in this day and age, might want to show their allegiance to a rising political Islamic movement. Also, a woman's so-called right to choose has to be preceded, at the least, by legal and social sexual equality. This is not the case for most. So if you consider the veil on a social scale, it represents neither a right nor a choice, and it is a lie to say otherwise. Of course, women wearing miniskirts and Jimmy Choo shoes may be under pressure from fashion industry's impossible ideals, as we often hear from people who are defending the veil, but it's as ridiculous to compare miniskirts with the veil as it is to compare Jimmy Choo shoes, they're fashionable designer shoes by the way, to foot binding, which actually aimed at preventing women from wandering away from their male guardians. The veil is not a piece of clothing, it's not a piece of cloth. Though it is often compared to miniskirts and other very lewd forms of clothing that the rest of us unveiled women wear, which Sonja had alluded to. It's not a piece of clothing, just as the straitjacket is not a piece of clothing, just as the body bag is not a piece of clothing, just as the chastity belt was not a piece of clothing, just as the Star of David pinned on Jews during the Holocaust was not just a bit of cloth. This, of course, doesn't mean that only women under Islam or veiled women are oppressed, but it is important to oppose the veil in its own right. And this has nothing to do with being hate-filled or promoting an attack on Muslims or veiled women, though Islamists like to portray it as such. It's interesting coming from a reactionary right-wing movement that has turned murder and mayhem into an art form. But as I have said before, opposing female genital mutilation doesn't mean you are attacking those who have been mutilated. Opposing foot binding and sati likewise. In fact, it is an essential in defending women's rights from a principled perspective. And this is why the chador, the burqa, the niqab must be banned. To defend women's rights. Not because they affect interaction, communication, and so on. These are side effects. And certainly not because they make people like Jack Straw feel uncomfortable. It has to be banned because sexual apartheid is unacceptable in the 21st century. Just as racial apartheid is unacceptable. Because it is unacceptable for women to be segregated in the 21st century. It is unacceptable for women to be forced to walk around in mobile prisons or a body bag because religion deems that they be kept invisible. Any mention of a ban, and quickly there are cries of authoritarianism. As an aside, it's interesting how much religion can actually get away with. And that its decree, for example, that women have to be veiled is not considered authoritarian. But more importantly, all bans are not necessarily bad. Society bans many things in order to safeguard and protect the people living in it, often due to left and progressive social movements demanding it. For example, child labor is banned, female genital mutilation is banned in some countries, child pornography is banned, rape is banned, and so on. A ban in such situations is a good thing. It helps to stop abuses from taking place. The argument that banning will only increase the burqa or niqab is ridiculous when used in other examples pertaining to defending people's rights, but it is somehow considered proper discourse when it comes to the veil. Also, calling for a ban doesn't necessarily mean you want to or will criminalize an entire segment of the population. For example, there's a rule to wear a helmet when you're driving a motorbike, but I don't see thousands of Sikhs languishing in British jails. The same is the case for smoking in non-smoking places or size zero models. Islamists and their apologists demand that we respect people's expressions and beliefs. As I have said many times, we are duty-bound to respect human beings. We are duty-bound to hold human beings sacred. But we have no duty to do that towards beliefs and expressions of beliefs. Having the right to a belief and religion is very different from it being a no-go area to do as it pleases and free of any criticism or condemnation. Also, they say that it's racist to criticize Islam, the veil, and political Islam. And I think that is nothing more than a load of rubbish. You cannot be racist against an idea, a belief, an ideology, or its expression. Racism is distinction based on human beings, not on beliefs and ideas. Saying this is just another attempt by the political Islamic movement and its apologists to stop you from criticizing Islam, to stop you from criticizing political Islam, and to stop you from standing up against the veil. A ban on the burqa, chador, niqab, and its likes are important, but it is not enough. The hijab or any conspicuous religious symbol must be banned from the state and education and relegated to the private sphere. This helps to ensure that government offices and officials, from judges, clerks, nurses, doctors, they're not promoting their religious beliefs and are instead doing their jobs. In the same way that a teacher can't teach creationism in the classroom, I know things are changing now, instead of evolution and science, or a pharmacist can't refuse contraceptive pills because it's against her beliefs, or a doctor can't refuse to see a female patient because he's not allowed to touch her. Finally, child veiling has to be banned full stop, not just in schools. This is a children's rights issue. While adults may so-called choose veiling or religion, children by their very nature have no beliefs, and they cannot make such choices. What they do is what their parents tell them to do. Again, the use of the term choice when it comes to children is deceptive, and we mustn't accept it. Children must be protected, full stop, absolutely, without condition. Even if they choose to work because their families are poor, even if they choose to not go to school because they don't want to, there are certain things that the state is duty-bound to do to ensure that children have full rights and access. Children must have the absolute right to be children. Nothing must be allowed to segregate them, restrict them from accessing information, advances in society, playing with boys, swimming, and generally doing all the things that children are supposed to do. Whatever their beliefs, parents do not have the right to impose their beliefs, including veiling on children. Children are not the properties of their parents. In the same way that they can't deny them medical care because they're Jehovah's Witnesses and they don't want any blood transfusions going on. In the same way that they can't beat or neglect them because it's their kids. They can't do it because children's rights are absolute. And when it comes to veiling, child veiling is a form of child abuse, and we have to be able to say it and stand up against it. Throughout history, progress has come not by apologizing for reaction, not for making excuse after excuse for it, but by standing up to it firmly, unequivocally. This is what has to be done today against Islam, against political Islam, and against the veil. This is our task, and we have to take it seriously. Thank you.